One of the most incredible things about Emily Dickinson and Emily Dickinson's poetry is just the depth, right? So, if you were to take Shakespeare and show Shakespeare to an absolute moron, he could tell you there's literature there. He might not know exactly what it is. He might not be able to put into words exactly why he feels that way, but there would be something there that he could point to and say, yeah, right around here, something happens. Something is different from the stuff that I have read in my life, and that depth is what it is. It's the same way that maybe you're not a car person, but you're at a stoplight and one of those Hellcats pulls up next to you. You might not know why, you might not be able to verbalize what it is, but you know there's a lot of car happening right there. If you are in the gym and say it's the 70s, say it's the 80s, Arnold walks in. You know Arnold. You don't know what it is that he has done to make his body that way, but you know that's a bodybuilder, right? This same type of thing is available in Emily Dickinson's poetry. And I look, I've said, going back to the Shakespeare example, you can show an idiot Shakespeare and he knows that there's literature there. Well, the true testament to the intelligence of the reader is not that. The true testament to the reader is to be fed Garfield comics and show you if the critic, the literary critic is truly a strong literary critic, he or she can show you the literature inside a Garfield comic, can show you the literature inside a how-to manual. Those things are there. You can pull them out. You can tease them about. It's just a little bit more work. Emily Dickinson's poetry is infinitely rewarding. And sometimes I think, particularly for myself, what I will do is I will read myself into a corner with a poem, and the obvious stuff is left outside. The obvious stuff is left beyond the reading that I have given because I am too eager to dive my fingers too deeply into the poem. The poem that we have today, I tried to think a lonelier thing. I think there is something in this poem which is just sitting on the surface that I don't know if I have ever particularly paid attention to before. The poem itself reads as such: I tried to think a lonelier thing than any eye had seen, some polar expiation, an omen in the bone of death's tremendous nearness. I probed retrieverless things, my duplicate to borrow, a haggard comfort springs from the belief that somewhere within the clutch of thought there dwells one other creature of heavenly love, forgot. I plucked at our partition, as one should pry the walls between himself and horror's twin within opposing cells. I almost strove to clasp his hand, such luxury it grew, that as myself could pity him, perhaps he pitied me. So the obvious surface level topic of this poem is loneliness, right? I tried to think a lonelier thing than any eye had seen, something that would be lonelier even than me, one other creature of heavenly love forgot. And if you think about Emily Dickinson and her biography, which surely you don't have to do. I'm not claiming that you have to consider biography when taking into account poetry or short stories or novels, any of it really, but I think that it does enhance what's going on here because it tells you there is some testament in Emily Dickinson's biography to the lived experience of loneliness or at least isolation. There's a very real thought here, a very real risk, a very real danger. There is something that is indelible to the loneliness epidemic, if you will. I remember when I was mid-20s. I think a lot of people struggle in their mid-20s because they're struggling with identity, they're struggling with the definition of self, right? And I'm not a social person. Something of a recluse, surprise. And I realized, I go to work, don't talk to anyone there really. I come home, there's no one there. I'll go to maybe a coffee shop, maybe a library, maybe a bookstore, and spend some time there. And if there's ever a thought, if ever arises some wriggling idea that maybe I would not have to be alone my entire life, where would I begin? Even if I decided to go out, to venture out, and try to meet someone, as dastardly as that sounds, as horrible as that must be. Well, guess what? All of the people like me are very likely to be at work or at the library or alone in a coffee shop working on something or in a bookstore. Those people as well aren't trying to meet someone. So it's a compounding damnation. And you read this poem, and I think one of the tempting things with Emily Dickinson is always to wonder where Emily Dickinson was at your age, or wonder how old was Emily Dickinson when she wrote this poem. To the best of our knowledge, Emily was 33 when she wrote this poem. Now, we don't know the process. We don't know exactly the goings-on of Emily Dickinson's life or authorship, but it seems she was probably 33 when she wrote this poem. She would have died at 56. She would have had 23 years after this point to go deeper into this loneliness and isolation. Emily Dickinson lived in a much harsher world as far as this sentiment is concerned than the world in which we currently live. The world in which Emily Dickinson lived, by the time she wrote this poem, she would have been the quote-unquote dreaded old maid. For Emily Dickinson at 33, it would have been too late. Basically, by societal standards, right? Emily Dickinson at 33, this sentiment would have been set in stone. Pains me to use a cliche, but I have to do it sometimes. When she was that age, when she was 33, do you think she knew that she would ultimately die alone? Well, I think that phrase in itself can be a bit misleading. Who knows how actually alone she was? Certainly she was isolated to an extent that would have been strange, that would have been perhaps a strain on people around her. Certainly, if you read her poetry, she suffered through this isolation, but who's to say that she would not have suffered more with companionship? Sometimes that's how I feel. As alone as I am, I can recognize probably that's better than being with someone who absolutely irritates me. I would be a different person on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. And in that, what we have here from Emily Dickinson is not the yearning to be with someone. It's the yearning to reach out and know that person is there who is also as lonely as you. That's different. It's to say that there is in this isolation the possibility, at least, of survival. I don't know that we have in this poem any reason to believe that our speaker is yearning for the companionship, the personal, close, personal, physical companionship of this mysterious other. I don't know that we have that there. We simply have the yearning to acknowledge that it's possible. The same reason that if you are one of these loner types, it's unlikely you meet someone like yourself, because in life, we all want to know that what we're doing, at least, is survivable. The way that you're carrying about your life is at least survivable. What you're doing is not terminal. But even then, our speaker does not have that. Our speaker does not know. Well, maybe it's through 4 years and 28 days of living in this type of isolation that you just stop waking up. Maybe it's through 9 years and 37 days of living in this isolation that you just stop waking up. Our speaker doesn't know. This is the path of all loners. Everything you do, you have to learn yourself. But yeah, those are the surface level things on this poem that I don't think I've ever talked about. This has to be the third, fourth time I've talked about this poem. It's one of those hidden gems of the Emily Dickinson canon that is, you can return to this at any time, right? So that's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos a week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.